All right, fantastic. Well, welcome everyone to the Microsoft Dynamics Virtual Users Group. Very excited to be back with our first session for this year. As a note, we are recording today's session. You'll see some information about that in just a moment. But before we get into the session itself, Marketo users groups are intended to be a safe space for you to be able to ask questions, learn about use cases, and be able to take things back to apply to your own organization. That means this is meant to be a safe space. So we do ask each of you to not contact members outside of this group without their consent. This is not an opportunity for you to sell your services or things like that. It's intended to be a knowledge share so that we can all learn and grow together. So we appreciate your cooperation with that. As I mentioned, we are recording the session today. This is so that if you have questions and want to go back and review the content afterward, it'll be available. We'll email out a copy to you. It will also be on the Marketo Virtual Users Group's YouTube channel and the mugs.marketo.com page for our group. If you don't wish to be a part of a recording, you can stay on mute and stay in the background. You're also welcome to speak up and ask questions during the session as well, or send questions through the chat and we can read them out here. If you do want to stay in touch, make sure you are signed up on mugs.marketo.com. If you're here, you likely already did register, so you'll get a copy of the recording today and be notified of any future meetings that we might have. On the mugs.marketo.com page, you will also see listings for Marketo users groups around the world, both in person and virtual. So if you have a local users group, feel free to join in. If you see a virtual users group meeting being posted, that's okay. It doesn't matter if you're in that city or not. It's a great way to be able to join and learn on new content that's coming out from these groups, regardless of where you're seated. Now, a couple of upcoming things. This group in particular, on April 20th, that's on Thursday, so 2 days from today, the Marketo product team is co-hosting a webinar with the Microsoft Dynamics product team. I'm going to actually post in the chat box a link to register for this session if you're interested. It's another great opportunity to get Dynamics and Marketo content. And so I believe they are going to be recording and sending that session out as well. So wanted to call special attention to that. We do have the next Marketo product release webinar coming up in May. I will also include that link in the chat box in just a moment here so that you'll have the latest upcoming roadmap and innovations. In addition to the users groups that are posted on the mugs.marketo.com site, there are also deep dive sessions being hosted with the Marketo champions. So there are some unique use cases being presented in each of these. So feel free to check those out as well. As I mentioned, we've got a ton of upcoming Marketo users groups meetings, so be sure to check that out, including some in other languages if you're located elsewhere in the world or have a first language that you'd prefer to consume content. Marketo has also got out a survey. You can get a review posted on G2 and get a $25 gift card for doing so. One item of note, if you are considering applying for the Marketo Champions program, which opens up in May, these are typically questions that are asked on the Marketo Champions application, as if you have posted reviews in some of these sites. So something to consider if you are looking to do that. And certification. In addition to the Marketo certified expert and associate exams, as well as the solutions architect exams. Some of these have been modified recently to allow you to renew a current exam without having to pay for a proctored exam. So make sure if you are getting close to renewal, check out the options that are available to you based on what current certification you may have. But they're moving to take a course, take a quiz, be recertified, making that process a little bit easier. So be sure to check that out. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn our session over to today's speaker. We are thrilled to welcome Shad Khan, who is a Marketo consultant at Revenue Pulse. Shad has been working in the industry for about 15 years now. He's got 10 years plus of experience in Dynamics and Marketo. So an excellent resource for this group. And we're going to dive in a little bit on the sync today, everybody's favorite challenge. So Shad, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Brooke. I want to have as much time for questions and answers. So I want to get through these slides as efficiently as possible. And so let's just get right into it. First of all, a little bit about myself. I want to make sure everyone's aware I am not the Shad Khan who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. I also, for those of you who have met me, you know that I don't have any hair on my head and I don't have a handlebar mustache as cool as this guy's. So, but if you do happen to be one of the few people that watches bowling on TV, you might catch me on the PBA Seniors Tour competing as an amateur. Everybody's got to have a stretch goal in life, and that happens to be mine, at least for the moment. And here we have William S. Preston, Esquire, and Theodore Logan. If you're of a certain age or you're down with 80s movies, you simply know them as Bill and Ted. And they're definitely the inspiration behind the title of this presentation. And with that in mind, I want to make sure we're all familiar with some of their more common vernacular. And if you think of questions along the way and want to post them into the chat, feel free to, I encourage you actually to try and use any of these words that we're going to cover here. So if we really like something or something's outstanding, we don't say that's cool or that's good. We say it's excellent. And building off of that, if something is really amazing, really outstanding, it's most excellent. But not everything in life is glass half full. So of course we need some words to express displeasure. So heinous and bogus are their words of choice in that realm. And I'll just throw in a few others that might make appearances here and there throughout the presentation. So in the original movie, Bill and Ted were in danger of flunking their history class. And if that happened, the course of the world's history would be altered in a most heinous way. So Rufus is a history teacher from the future who goes back in time and saves the day, ensures they pass their class. Now, I'm not saying I'm Rufus here, but I have, as Brooke said, been at this Marketo Dynamics space for a little over 10 years now. And I've learned a lot of hard lessons. And so my goal here today is twofold. One, prevent you from making some of the mistakes I've made myself or I've seen in a Dynamics Marketo environment. And more importantly, perhaps provide a framework to give you the ability to make incremental progress, because it can be overwhelming depending on how much of what you've inherited in some cases or what you've inadvertently done in your instance and don't know how to undo it. So here's a brief synopsis of my marketing ops career. My career actually predates anything we knew of as marketing ops. I come from a demand gen background actually, but the years that matter from the perspective of this audience and this presentation are the years I was a marketing operations manager using Marketo with Salesforce Dynamics. That was my first Marketo experience. And when the company I worked for migrated from Salesforce to Dynamics, it was immediately apparent to me that the user experience was not the same, to put it lightly. So I've been on a mission here, especially since I joined Revenue Pulse, but it started way back then to get functionality improvements, get the experience to be more equivalent to that Salesforce.com customers experience. But I can't fight this battle alone. So when I was in high school, there was this band called the Beastie Boys. They had a hit song called Fight for Your Right. It's a parody. And I think most of you know, or hopefully know, that the song was actually called Fight for Your Right to Party. But Ted agrees that this is a most triumphant pun. And I think my grandfather would be pleased also to know that I worked this somehow into a professional presentation. So the next few slides, I want to give you some specific examples of features and functionality that might exist. I'm going to start on a positive note here. I did meet with product management at Marketo, the lead on the Dynamics integration, and he gave me two features that were recently released. I would like to crowdsource at this point and ask that you test these features as well. The sandbox I tested in, I was not able to get a successful result on either of these, but let's just walk through them. And by all means, message me on LinkedIn. I don't know if I have any other way to, at this point, we can talk about contact information later, but Message from Shad Khan at Revenue Pulse, not the one who owns the Jaguars, if you want to let me know what you're finding in your instance. So deleting people, this is something that Marketo Salesforce customers have been able to do since day one. If you've ever seen this flow action or played around with it, you know that it was traditionally blocked off. You could see it, but the true false toggle was not enabled. It's definitely enabled now, at least in the sandbox I played with. They make it very clear that this only works for triggered campaigns. That's going to be a recurring theme here. But I was not able to delete any leads or contacts in Dynamics. So like I said, let me know what you find in your experience. I've confirmed in my instance that there's no blockers in Dynamics, but that's something to be aware of. The user role may have some blockers. There could be a global setting in your environment. Dynamics is super customizable. That's one of the pros and cons of it, is just how customizable it is. So be mindful of that when you test. Disqualified leads that get reopened. So the scenario here was, a lead gets disqualified. There's still technically a linkage to it, or it can be relinked, I guess is the way to think of it. So the Marketo record remains. It can obtain new scores as a typical scenario. Other fields might get updated on the Marketo record. And if that lead gets reopened at a later date, we want to see those field updates that happened on the Marketo side flow through to Dynamics, the lead that got reopened. That was not happening apparently until recently. I was not able to get that result. At least it's inconclusive in my testing. So again, please let me know what you're encountering in your environments. The next one is creating tasks. This was introduced to Dynamics users, I believe, the summer of 2021. And it's an incomplete because it only works with triggers, not batch campaigns. I thought that, we'd see this, in the next release, but here we are 2 years later and it still hasn't come. So again, the more of us that are asking for these specific gaps to be filled, the more likely we are to get these prioritized and into the products that we use on a day-to-day basis. And if you haven't seen this visual, it's probably because you haven't been in a Salesforce.com instance within the last couple of years. This is, I believe, released almost 3 years ago now to Salesforce.com users. And it's much more than a cosmetic update. I won't go through these bullet points, but you can see the post yourself online if you want, or you can, watch this recording. But these are major feature functionality enhancements that significantly add value to sales reps that use it, in my opinion. So again, when I talked to product management, I said, this is a big deal. And this is something I would focus my limited resources on if I was in your position. So just, stay tuned in this space, I guess is all I can say. So let's take a step back now and talk about, yes, there is a difference between Salesforce.com Marketo user experience versus your own as a Dynamics user. I want to kind of provide a high-level explanation, in my opinion, on why that is the case. And for me, it goes back to the origin stories of these two companies and how different they are. Salesforce, what was revolutionary about them at the time was their app exchange and encouraging the developer community to create plugins, other apps that, if you didn't like their sales out of the box reporting, that's okay. Embed something in there that you like better. Always making Salesforce CRM the core of that, solution, that tech stack. So we know that they've purchased Pardot, they have Einstein, there's consolidation taking space all across our world, but they will have there's no opposition to you mixing and matching and creating a best of breed tech stack in their world. So contrast that with a Microsoft model, which is they like to embed themselves with IT departments and sell everything Microsoft. And they started life as, basically a monopolist with their operating system. And so they can clearly not operate that way in the CRM space that, we play with Marketo, but it's hard to change a culture once it's, rooted in their state of mind. So yes, in the 10 years that I've been part of this space, the relationship is much better. The integration is better. it's still a work in progress. So let's be honest about where we are. Work to do for sure. But I'm encouraged by the conversations I've had recently. So the thing I didn't mention is that you are the second largest user base behind Salesforce. It's a distant second, but you are still the second largest. And so there is a commitment. I got this, from the product manager himself. There's an ongoing commitment to make this relationship work. So if sometimes you feel like it's hopeless, don't lose hope is my message here. So let's talk about your own instance now and how you're feeling about it. Maybe you're new in your position, or you just haven't seen a whole lot. You haven't done a deep dive, and maybe you've just seen a lead fail create every once in a while, or maybe a sales rep asks you why a task didn't get created. Nothing major though, it's just onesie twosie, things like that. But perhaps you've done a deep dive, and the deeper you dug, the more you found that didn't make sense, the more troubled you got, the more overwhelmed you got. It's okay to be here. I've been here. The mission here is, how do you get out of that space? And the way that we coach at Revenue Pulse is this model of incremental progress. And it's particularly apt, I think, in your case, especially if you found that you don't even know where to start with the problems you've uncovered. So we like to call this the crawl, walk, run methodology. But I want something better for you. Bill and Ted want something better for you. I want you to be able to crawl, walk, and rock out. So how do we get there? That's what the rest of this presentation is about, is to create that framework and give you specifics. So building off of that concept, this is the same idea of working your way up a maturity curve step by step with more detail built around it. So this is another slide that I've borrowed from the Revenue Pulse deck, but I've customized it for you. And the question the way to look at this, and the question you ask yourself is, where do I spend most of my day-to-day existence in terms of these specific actions that are listed in bullet points? The reality is you're probably going to be straddling multiple levels, but the premise of this presentation, and this is, I think, something you all can relate to, is if you don't trust your sync and you don't trust the data flowing back and forth, it severely limits your ability to go above and beyond just the basic email blasting, capture leads, all the fun stuff we like to do as marketers, advanced nurturing, dynamic content. We can't trust our data coming back from Dynamics. It really gives you reservations about whether you want to do that type of thing. So probably 90% of this presentation is going to be all about what does it take to establish trust in our sync. So we're going to get into the weeds on level 1 mechanics and dream up, set that foundation so that you can build off of that, get into level 2, 3, and beyond. First thing I want to make sure you're aware of is we've been talking about sync issues, lack of some missing functionality in the native sync compared to Salesforce customers. If you weren't aware of this, there are options other than the native sync. Yes, you get that with your subscription, and I would assume most of you are using it, but there are plenty of third-party connectors on the market that can be used in lieu of the native sync. There's pros and cons to this, so I don't want to sway you in one way or another. Just go in and do a deep dive and make an informed decision based on a few basic ideas. If you do go with a third-party sync, you can end up with more functionality, more flexible possibilities, more stable if it's done right and thoughtfully, but you are taking on ownership of that at this point. So you cannot go to Marketo support if you have a sync issue. Obviously, you have to have gone into this knowing that either the company that you've partnered with has a support staff that you can go to, or you have a model where, just like you probably have a power user running your ad Marketo instance, probably that same person or somebody of similar skill set would have to manage and own the connector and be the know-it-all about that, and be able to troubleshoot, at least be the tier 1 line of support when issues do come up, or just ongoing maintenance. You create a new field in Marketo or Dynamics, there's work to do with the Dynamics, that connector, inevitably. So just be mindful again of the pros and cons. And of course, it's not free. None of those tools are going to be without a subscription cost. So the other alternative is a hybrid approach. And I do have a client using this where they're using the native sync for leads, contacts, opportunities, and accounts. But they are also pulling Marketo program member and status data out of Marketo, feeding it into a Dynamics with a custom API. So you have all kinds of options available to you. I just, wanted to make sure that's clear. If you thought you just have the native sync and that's it, there's all kinds of possibilities beyond that. The other thing I want to make sure you're aware of, and again, especially if you're using the native sync, is that Marketo does offer something called enterprise support. What is it? It's basically they give you a dedicated support tech that will be your designated contact on all tickets. The idea here is that you probably already know this, but I'll make it very clear. Dynamics is so customizable that I guarantee you, you've each done something in your instance that makes it unique and makes it more potentially liable to have some sort of sync issue that's unique. And that's really hard to troubleshoot for, especially when you're dealing with a different tech each time. So the idea here is that you build a rapport with this person, they build a history with you, some institutional knowledge, and that knowledge pays dividends over time. It's not something that's going to magically, solve all your issues overnight, but it does. When I've seen it done right, it can definitely pay dividends months down the road. The other thing it can do is you've got a person that a tier 1 level person that oftentimes the more problematic sync issues need tier 3 support, sometimes even engineering. And it's hard to get to those individuals. They do exist at Marketo. It's just really hard to get to them. And having a tech support person that can act as your liaison advocate can be huge. So when all of those stars align, Bill and Ted agree, this can be an excellent experience for everyone involved. Just takes some time to get there. So now we're going to get into what I think is, the substance of the presentation. We know there are sync issues that surface in a Marketo Dynamics environment. What are they? What are the root causes? What can we do as admins to mitigate them or eliminate them? So let's just go through them one by one. I listed this one as my number one because I don't know what your experience is with duplicate detection settings in Dynamics, but I misunderstood them. I took it to be the blocking of the creation of records, but that's not exactly how they work. They do block creation of duplicates based on whatever rules you set up, but they also block updates of existing records. And this is where the problem lies. So I'm going to walk you through a really basic use case and show you how problematic this can be in a Marketo Dynamics integration. So let's say you mimic what Marketo does. You create a rule on leads and contacts to not allow the creation or update of a lead if an email already matches that in the leads entity in Dynamics. So step one is somebody fills out a form on Marketo on your website. It's a new email address, so you create a record in Marketo that syncs over, creates a new lead in Dynamics. So far, so good. Now that person continues to be active, the score increases on that Marketo record, and the next sync comes up, and Marketo wants to pass that updated score over to the lead. It's going to be blocked, and that's where the problem lies. So now you've got a sync fail. It's a sync failure for all practical purposes. No error is going to be generated because Dynamics is doing exactly what it's designed to do. And so when I learned about this, what I've done with clients is I basically, step one, if I have a new Dynamics client, I go, what kind of duplicate detection settings do you have enabled? And to this point, I have never seen one that we liked. So we have disabled all of them. I just see no value at this point in having them on leads or contacts specifically. So the solution here, again, I just stated it, disable them. You've got the Marketo, email blocker, email functionality already working for you. There are possibilities above and beyond this if you get into the world of third-party connectors. But if you're using the native sync, my advice is just to lean on the Marketo dedupe functionality, live with that, and have nothing going on with regards to leads and contacts in the duplicate detection settings area. It can only cause problems like the one on updates that I just explained. Next one is deserialization errors. That's a technical term that I had to translate into plain English once I learned what it meant. In our world, it means you're trying to pass a value into Dynamics on a pick list field that it does not recognize. And Dynamics is also case sensitive, which we, as Marketo users don't have to worry about, but we do have to worry about it because Dynamics is. So where you probably already have a handle on field management. Only admins should be allowed to create fields. But where I've seen the loophole and how this can surface in a real environment is on the editing of forms. So if you're like a lot of users, you probably have campaign managers who are, you entrust them to maybe clone a program template, run their own webinars, fill in the blanks. And if you're using the standard marketing user out of the box user role, delete and editing forms is available to them. So the advice here is if you're using that user role, if you haven't totally customized it and built it from the ground up, is just come in here and uncheck these two boxes, because these are if they can edit the form, they can edit the values on the fields, and that's how the problems surface. It's not their job to know these nuances that Dynamics is super particular about what it wants to see. So just take that possibility away and pull ownership of forms to your core, marketing ops team, your power Marketo users, and not let the ones who come in and run campaigns in the fashion that I just described potentially create scenarios where they can send data to Dynamics that's rejected. This one is, it can be, I don't know if there's a blueprint on which fields you should map and which ones you shouldn't. I think you basically go off of your institutional knowledge, and it's very easy to say, oh, maybe I should check these modified by fields. So let's explain what happens here and why this it can be problematic. The modified by date, let's use a scenario where you've got 500 fields on your leads in Dynamics, and you really only map a portion of them, maybe 100 are mapped back to Marketo. The modified by field in date on gets updated regardless of which of those 500 fields gets updated. So it creates a massive amount of data that Marketo wants to pull back in the 5-minute syncs. It's a recipe for basically creating delays. It's not a failure issue, but in the case of my client where this was turned on inadvertently, we were seeing a case of 8-hour delays because they didn't run a 24/7 operation. They're just, the delays would be created during the day, and they would work themselves out at night. But it was very obvious that it was happening, and this was the reason why. So as soon as we unchecked those boxes, sync delay went away, and everything was good. But Bill and Ted were aghast as well that something so little could create such a big delay. So this one, I am not sure how it happened, but it did. And basically, so what we have here is, again, case sensitivity coming into play. So you can see the difference. The delta here is the capital letters in the Dynamics schema versus the Marketo schema name. The end result for this scenario is that the updates in Dynamics can flow back to Marketo records, but Marketo cannot update Dynamics leads and contacts. Unfortunately, there's no solution that you as an admin can do to mitigate this. We basically either have to go to your Dynamics admin, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, or wait. This is logged with Marketo Product Management. It's a feature enhancement request. This could be problematic for your Dynamics team. And the analogy I would make is if you've ever tried to hide a field in Marketo, you know that you have to look at the used by list and go through every instance of where it's used and remove it. They would have a similar exercise in terms of having to say, where is this field used, and make any type of updates to workflows or whatever. So it's not an easy ask, is what I'm saying here. It just totally depends on what your relationship is like with that team, and how problematic it would be for them to actually take the time to make the schema change safely. Yeah, what I'm getting at basically is they can't just change the name. They have to think about the downstream consequences of that. The last one I'm going to show is also a bug that unfortunately there's no resolution for it yet. I've showed this to product management because I do believe it is a bug, for no better word for it other than that. Let's talk about what happened here and make sure you understand what's transpired so that we know why it is a bug and how it affects your sync. What we have here is the Marketo activity log at the top is a score change that happened properly because somebody attended a webinar, but immediately thereafter, the score is being reverted back to the original score. Notice that there's no smart campaign to the right. So that was the red flag for me. Among other things, I just knew the score should not go down in this way. So I clicked on the hyperlink off to the left, and sure enough, I could see that the reason was Marketo was being instructed by Dynamics to pull back the old value. I know in this instance, there's no way that should happen. There's no workflow in Dynamics that can touch score fields. The fields are read-only. There's literally nothing that can happen in Dynamics that could tell Marketo that it's a new score should appear on that Marketo record. So I went digging for other examples. I found more, did an analysis. It's not happening a lot. It happens, to my best guess, less than 1% of the time. But my hypothesis is that the time that the field value changes in Marketo in relation to when the data sync between Marketo and Dynamics actually occurs is the combination that creates this phenomena. I believe we all know there's a 5-minute sync rule. So Marketo and Dynamics talk to each other every 5 minutes, but I don't remember the exact number of seconds. Somebody in support told me one time, let's say it's 45 seconds. If the field change happens during that 45 seconds, that's when I believe this happens. So it's the combination of those two. Again, I've shared this with product management and they're off researching this. There is no solution right now other than, in this case, I know that score fields cannot be updated by Dynamics. There's nothing, Marketo owns them, so to speak. So I turned on block updates for these score fields, but it's not a real solution, obviously. First name, last name, we need that bidirectional sync. If somebody changes the name on the lead from Johnny to John, I want to see that back on the Marketo record. So to be clear, this is not our solution. It's going to have to be something you understand is happening in your Marketo instance. And for me, being at this so long, I know customers often get global resyncs. I've heard of one customer that got them daily every night. To the most extreme. I believe this phenomena, now that I have seen it, and we've talked about best practices, what you can do to not create data sync issues. This is one we can't do anything about, and it's a real bug, and it's something that needs to be addressed. So this is priority number one in my mind that I told when I talked to the product managers, like this needs to be figured out. What I showed in my example was a change score that happened like this, and then 5 minutes later, another score change happened, and it didn't, it took the right score. So it's something to do with the timing of two things: when the field update happens, when the sync happens, I believe. And again, stay tuned in this space. So those are the big five. There's a handful of others. Ways that obviously sync failures can occur. Disqualified leads, don't talk, improper sync user permission. So documentation for Marketo is pretty good. It needs to be followed to the T. Don't let your CRM admins stray and make their own arbitrary decisions about what permissions it should have. Just go with whatever the book says. And then obviously the sync can be disabled. We've experienced this in late February on the Marketo side. Your Dynamics admin can disable the sync. I want to make sure you're clear on what happens and what doesn't happen when the sync gets re-enabled inevitably. Lead and contact field updates, I guess, opportunities, all of that native update field update functionality flows back and forth. It gets logged while the sync is down, and it will flow back and forth when it's restored. But what will not get retried are lead create failures, task create, ownership changes initiated by smart campaigns. So it's your job as an admin then to go in and do an analysis of what failed, run batch campaigns to make up for those lost activities and lead creates. It's a nightmare. And I made that clear to the product manager. And this is something where if you do get into investigating third-party tools, this is a clear differentiator. And in many cases, this error management and rehandling of resolutions. Something again to think about if you've really had it with this type of thing and are looking for alternatives. That's definitely something to be evaluating, is that type of capability. So the solutions that we do have within the native sync realm is sales training. It applies to that disqualified lead scenario. I can't tell you how many times I've seen reps disqualify leads instead of recycle them. Seems like a basic thing, or they should merge the lead into a contact that already exists. They just think it's, I'll work the contact and the lead can go away. No, we need obviously to merge that, and we need to retain all that history. So if you train them, you explain why. And I think what I should have added to this bullet point is sales training, sales management oversight. Obviously, it's both are needed to get what's needed from a lifecycle management perspective, and retaining the complete 360-degree view of this person. Collaborating with your sales CRM admins, your success manager. I think what I'm going to get to, it's not yet, but there's a slide coming up here where we talk about the people involved. But we've talked about the fact that yes, there's this, a certain amount of your data that's probably out of sync unless you just had a global resync done. And it's a daunting proposition to think about how much you want to get into the weeds and find out just how much data is out of sync. I recommend a piecemeal approach. Think about it from the perspective of which fields Marketo owns, like the score field example I gave earlier, and which fields are owned exclusively and updated exclusively in Dynamics. The reason I use that starting point is it can give you some insight into where the failures are initiating. If there's a pattern, like it's only happening on the Marketo generated updated fields, that's insightful. The other variable here is what type of tools do you have at your disposal? I mentioned that I'm from a demand gen background. I have a marketing degree. I don't know how to use Access. I don't know SQL. I would use Excel if I was totally on my own. But if I had an analyst, I could scale up and do a much better job. So again, use the tools and your skills that you have available to you and approach it in this manner, though. You basically want to get a guesstimate of what percent, I have 100,000 leads and I looked at person score and, 1,000 of them are out of sync. I have a 1% sync failure rate or something, and it's going to grow. That's the thing about this. Based on the last bug I showed, it's steadily going to creep up from that point forward. So what I have on the right is a screenshot of an ID field that I highly recommend you create in your Marketo instance to facilitate this type of analysis. A unique key that is shared across Dynamics and Marketo. So you want to create this Marketo ID field inside of Dynamics on leads and contacts, populated with a smart campaign in Marketo. Upon create, just use the lead ID token and push the exact same value into the Marketo ID field. That way, if you have an extract from Dynamics, you have that Marketo ID field and you're looking at exactly the same person in Marketo. using that field. Oh, and when you extract a CSV file from Marketo, you don't see the system generated ID field. I'm already forgetting some of the rationale for creating this, but you need that unique key so that you can do the comparison. And obviously we know things like email don't work because you could have duplicates, you could have bad data. So you need a real unique key. And this is my preferred way. Simple, super simple way to do this. The other thing you'll need to do is create email alerts. You want to be proactive about spotting signs of trouble. Unfortunately, the error logs, and we'll look at some screenshots just to make sure you know where they are. And the logs from Dynamics, they just are not helpful. They may be instructive once a problem is found, but they're never going to flag an issue for you. So yeah, unfortunately, that is the reality, and nobody's happy about that. But here's an example of an alert that I highly recommend you create. It's again, it can indicate whether you have a complete sync failure down, it just leads to an investigation. But in this case, I created an alert that will tell me whether a lead that Marketo told Dynamics to create does not get created. And if you look at the animation, you'll see that I wait 12 hours. We have the 5-minute sync. Shouldn't I wait much less than that? This is where if you create alerts like this, you'll get into a world where you realize how often the 5-minute sync does not apply. I mentioned that 8-hour backlog that I had with the client. There can be a variety of things that happen that bog down the system. System updates and running in Dynamics on a weekend. So I found that the 12 hours, at least in this instance, was that sweet spot to not get a bunch of false positives, because that's what was driving me nuts. Is I had it set for maybe 2 hours and I was looking up the record, when I had a moment, and there was the lead had been created. It was just I needed to set that time a little further than I anticipated. 12 hours happened to be that happy medium where I don't get any false positives anymore. So it's just something you'll have to tinker with for your particular instance. The other thing that I like to use alerts for is we have some workflows oftentimes where we need to populate a custom object in Dynamics and we can't do it directly. So we have a Boolean field in Marketo that updates a Boolean field on a lead or contact in Dynamics. Dynamics is supposed to close the loop in their workflow by setting that back to false. If that doesn't get back to false within a certain amount of time, again, you got to play around with it. And if it's not set to false, then it's time to start investigating whether you have a sync issue or not. So those are just a couple of examples. I'm sure you probably can think of others in your own instance that pertain to you, but you want to be proactive, and the best tool we have with the native sync is the alerts functionality to tip you off when something is not right. So here are the tools within Marketo, and starting from the top of the bullet points list, Dynamics does have 2 logs. So if you've ever created a support ticket related to a sync issue, I'm sure you know this, Marketo is going to ask for the logs, and there are 2 specifically. There's one just called Marketo logs and one called Marketo error logs. They are different, and they're going to ask for both. Generally a date range based on whenever the problem you unearthed occurred. The notifications tab obviously has a lot more than potential Marketo dynamic sync issues. I don't know if I've ever actually used that to help get resolution on a support ticket, but just be aware that it's there. And then more importantly, over in the admin tool, under Microsoft Dynamics, there is a sync errors tab. This one has at least provided some insight. Again, it never was obvious what the issue was, but we were able to correlate something we saw happening. Oh, it's the schema issue that I showed you earlier. It did generate an error inside of the sync errors tab, but we had to connect those dots. The language of the sync error message did not clearly say, this is what's happening. So yes, and there's limited utility to these tools, but they are there. And think about all the people that we would need based on where you want to get to in terms of optimizing your Marketo Dynamics experience. It can feel overwhelming, but it's not all on you. You have data analysts, hopefully, that you could lean on for that field comparison audit. Your CRM admins are huge allies in this. You should be joined at the hip if you want your Dynamics Marketo instance to function properly. And we talked about some of the Marketo personnel, that enterprise support option. There are tier 3 experts that know this stuff in engineering. It's just hard to get to them. And your customer success manager can be a person you can lean on for escalation as well. And of course, consultants like myself. So now we're switching gears here. That was all of the, if you recall that slide with the 4 levels and how I talked about setting the foundation is fundamental for us as Dynamics Marketo users, and how we can't take that stability for granted. If we get to that point where we do, we trust our sync now. This is the world that comes beyond after that. And you can actually start using Marketo and Dynamics the way they're intended. You can use smart list triggers that have Dynamics fields to run email blasts and any other campaigns. I've seen clients use list imports. It's old-fashioned way of doing business, but if that's the only way you can get a send list that you trust, that's what customers are doing. And we need to get beyond that. Marketo and Dynamics are enterprise level tools, and it's a shame that this has to be done. Segmentations obviously come with the territory with building this trust. You want to be able to pull back, customer versus non-customer as a classic example. If you can't trust your data and your accounts entity coming back properly, you can't do that type of segmentation. So it's cool to get beyond that and do more advanced marketing, which we all are kind of in this business for. So once you, and then this is level 3 now, and that's previous slide. If you get into the world of lead scoring and lifecycle management, you will know that there's a whole set of new challenges above and beyond the sync issues that we covered in the earlier parts of this presentation. This could be a presentation unto itself. So I don't want to get into the weeds here. I just want to alert you that new challenges await you if you're using the native sync and you get into this more advanced world of, I want to score my leads and create MQLs and all that cool stuff that comes with lifecycle management. So beyond that, now we're getting into, I've got my act together. I've got lifecycle. The other thing, you can almost do this in tandem with lifecycle. In fact, I have done it in tandem in implementations. This is just the idea. Again, this goes back to my Salesforce legacy and how I liked the campaign members entity in Salesforce, and Dynamics doesn't really have one. So program members and programs data in Marketo it has no real home in Dynamics. So you can create a custom object to take that information and make it visible to sales. I've also seen campaigns and events being kind of customized in a way that can accept program member status information. It's that status information that's key. We have campaign lists over in Dynamics. We don't have status information. So yes, I know who was invited to a webinar campaign. That's fine. I don't know who attended, who's registered. I don't know anything beyond that. So that's why I liked the campaign members entity inside of Salesforce and why I've tried to replicate it. So this is literally a screenshot from my previous life in that 2009 to 13 era where I had my Dynamics consultants literally recreate the campaign members entity inside of Dynamics. And my philosophy is, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. There's no reason to, do anything other than imitate the way Salesforce does it. It's fine just the way it is. It gives you exactly what you need. And you embed that inside the lead and contacts entity, and sales has something other than, it's a supplemental to the sales insight is the way I see it. It's a nice synopsis. Sales insight can get unwieldy, right? It's got a lot of information in there if somebody's really active. So this gives a nice synopsis. And that's what I mean by empowering sales. Now we're getting into, the world of attribution. So this is kind of the pinnacle. So, hats off to you if you're in this world. You've come a long way. All of this is dependent on everything preceding it working properly. If you build an attribution model and lifecycle's not working, or it will become obvious when you build reports. Things are not going to make sense. So that's why this is the last step in the chain. This is the ultimate objective. But going back to that crawl, walk, run approach, don't feel like you have to get here overnight. It will drive you insane if you have that mentality going and take it a piece at a time, make incremental progress, feel good about what you're doing, and move on to the next step. So if you apply these best practices, I think I'll just let Abe Lincoln speak for me at this point. But I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Brooke, I'll let you open up the floor. I'll stop screen sharing in a moment here, I guess. But that's all I had for now, and definitely am interested in hearing what other questions have come up.
Thank you so much, Chad. This was wonderful. And thank you to everyone who has contributed through the comments during this session. We're going to go ahead and open up the floor for Q&A. So you are welcome to take yourself off mute, come on camera if you'd like or not, totally up to you. Chat box is also open if you've got some questions or wanted to dive into anything that was discussed today.
Hey, Brooke, it's Dan. I have a question for you and the team. We're currently working with support on this, and I could have sworn at one time when a lead was qualified in Dynamics, the originating lead record simply changed its type to a contact and didn't create a temporary duplicate within Marketo where there's a lead and the new contact, which eventually gets merged. Do you know what the expected behavior is?
I'll take that one, Dan, because that's the world I lived in when I was, figuring out the lead lifecycle tracking.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen both. The duplicate scenario that you mentioned is in the instance I've worked with. It's the minority scenario. In most cases, you don't see the duplicate temporarily. It's a more seamless, more like Salesforce, basically. It's
right. And
right?
The problem with that is when it's merged, obviously the contact record wins. So it's changing the source type and source info now to Dynamics versus a web form fill out or a contact us form. But what's really killing us from a lead progression perspective is, let's say our lead lifecycle status was a sales accepted lead, and went from MQL to SQL. Then during the merge, it then updates again, even though that value is already in there, and it's causing duplicate issues within our progression dashboard. So there's all kinds of issues when there's two records and then a merge exists.
Yeah, it's a pain. I ended up running like batch campaigns in many cases, and I have a backup score field because this is a problem for score. It messes the score up too.
Right.
Yeah. So you got to figure out which fields matter to you and have backup versions of them that you can restore after the merge takes place. It's really it's high level stuff, and you're clearly living in that space. So definitely, I mentioned, Brooke, that this could be a whole presentation unto itself, that whole lead lifecycle management. It's a beast. I don't have any easy answers for you, Dan, other than that, yes, it can be done. It's kludgy. It's not anything we should have to do either. It's that's my main beef, is like, why is this so clunky? Why are we getting two different experiences? It's all contingent, I think, on when the sync happens again, kind of like that bug I showed. It's like, when does the lead get qualified in relation to when the sync happens? That's my best explanation for why we see two different things play out.
Right. Just one quick question, and this has been on many of our minds for the past 5 years when Marketo supposedly committed to this. I think it was at one of the, it might have been a Marketo summit before Marketo was even acquired by Adobe, but it's showing the actual value of lookup fields in Marketo versus just showing the GUID that exists in Dynamics.
Are you using instead of looking at the lookup field, are you populating a kind of a mirror field?
No, I mean, what's happening is, so one of the out of the box fields in Dynamics is owned by, which signifies the what region within our company owns this lead. And what's coming over is the actual GUID and not that person's name.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's a lookup field, if I'm right.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah,
It has a little
that's
search.
That's native. That's the expected behavior, unfortunately, is the GUIDs. And you have,
Yeah, they said they were going to fix that, but it never came to fruition. And I actually pasted a link to the
okay. Okay.
and there's 5 pages of comments, and a lot of people are frustrated because it's so hard to work with just GUIDs.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely already got my vote.
Yeah, it looks like Dustin mentioned in the comments that he's used OpenPrice to solve the GUID issue. So that's an interesting approach. We did have a question, Shad, from Jackie in the comments. Any idea why a custom Dynamics field wouldn't sync to Marketo if Marketo can see it? I can check the box in the field sync menu, but when I try to save, I don't get a success message or an error message. It just seems like nothing happens.
Update in Dynamics, not getting back to Marketo. Is that? Let's see here.
Sounds like she's checking the box in the Dynamics sync in the admin, and it's not showing up. And that's happened to us. Sometimes it can take a few hours for that to actually show up.
Timing is you need to be patient for sure. If it doesn't appear, I think I would go to support. Is the bottom line. I think I've seen this happen where they can do something that it kind of initiates the pullback if it fails on its own.
The other thing with the going back to the GUID issue, and we actually looked at OpenPrice a while ago, and a lot of the stuff that we're now able to do with demand-based, now that they once they acquired Engage-Dynamics, a lot of the orchestration components are now part of demand-based's ABX cloud. And then they just released a native Dynamics connector that's going to bring a lot of those values over. So I'm hoping once we get this deployed, that we'll be able to take those friendly values and then sync them back to Marketo.
Yes, is OpenPrice a connector, basically a middleware type
Data
product?
orchestration platform.
It's an orchestration platform.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Again, that's going back to my earlier slide. There are other options out there. In the interest of this user group, I won't talk about any of them, but the translation issue, seeing the GUIDs instead of the actual values, that's where third-party solutions can be an answer.
Yeah.
Well, that hour flew by, Brooke. Anything else that we want to explore before we drop?
Yeah, it sure did. Thank you so much, Shad. Really appreciate it. And Dan, to you as well.
Yeah.
No problem. It's been a long time, Brooke.
I know. It's great to see you.
Yeah. I feel like I've met you, Dan, or
yeah, I met you at one of the summits.
Previous summits. Yeah. It's been a while.
Presented a couple times.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. We're going to go ahead and close this out because we are at the top of the hour, but we appreciate you all being here. Thank you to especially our familiar faces who have been with us every time we host one of these, and certainly welcome to everyone who is here for the first time. Excited to have you. I will be posting this recording out to the Marketo users group page and the YouTube page very shortly here, as well as the email that will come out to everyone who has registered for today's session. If you do have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again, and we will see you very soon. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brooke and Chad.
Thank you.